Machine recording. Testing 1, 2. Yay, we got sound. Welcome everybody. I'm hooked up for this presentation I'm going to show you guys here. All right, I call this Attack and Decay. All right, so here's where everything basically starts. The Tascam Porta 1. For people that don't have a lot of money, I mean, I grew up in a trailer park, and we definitely didn't have any money. I came from, my mom raised us, and I was really interested in sound. My dad was a DJ for over 50 years. He retired recently, but he would always bring me music all the time, and I listened to everything from Elvis, the Beatles, to Jean-Jacques Perret, and the Plastic Cow Goes Moog. Those were albums that I listened to constantly when I was a kid. And when I grew up, I kind of grew out of sounds real fast. I just wanted something that sounded different. It's hard to explain, but anything that was on the radio I hated. So I wanted to make my own sounds. And the Tascam Porta 1 kind of let me do that. It was the first time that you could actually record multi-tracks onto a cassette tape. These are the tapes we used. Maxell. You got the XL2s. The high bias ones were the ones you needed to use for your Porta 1. Fostex made one too. It was called an X15. My friend Pat Graphic had one of those. Hunting Lodge. This is from my hometown of Port Huron. We got Knox Mitchell here and Otho Thorne. Let's give them a hand. They drove all the way from Detroit, Michigan to be here. These guys I hold dear to my heart because I grew up with these guys. These guys got together in '82 and put out the Hunting Lodge Live Harrington Ballroom cassette, and I was at that show, and it basically changed my life. I said, this is something I really want to pursue, and I did. But that's, we got Scott Roosh, you got Lon C. Dial, and that's Helmut Robertson, who was the drummer toward the end of Hunting Lodge there. The beginning members were both just Scott and Lon, two really nice guys that are still real good friends of mine. As far as Columbus is concerned, this was the earliest thing that I could find that was recorded at OSU. They had an electronic music studio, and this was recorded there in 1985, and it is an amazing piece of electronic music. I mean, it borders on noise and just loops and all kinds of stuff. And this was done in '85 by this guy named David Keane. If you can find this album, get it. It's pretty cool. He used to have visual presentations with his music as well, and the graphic you see on that album cover, they were actually projected onto dancers when he actually performed this work called Aurora. So I'm trying to get more information on the electronic music studio at OSU. I might have to talk to Mark Gunderson about that and see if it's still there or what. I have no idea because I can't find any information on it. But this was recorded there in 1985 and released then, and it is a really neat piece of early electronic music for Columbus, Ohio. This was a big magazine. When I first moved here, it was 1983, and I tried to find other people that were interested in the same kind of things that I was interested in. And these books kind of helped pave the way. They kind of showed the scene that was in Columbus at the time. The magazine on the left, that was 1981. I wasn't even here yet, but they were already reviewing tons and tons of really cool music, lots of alternative, lots of punk, lots of noise, and they were basically responsible for having a lot of people from England visit Columbus, Ohio to play, and the big one was Cocteau Twins right there in 1983 on the right. When they came to town, there was a news channel in Columbus, and they actually ran a story on the Cocteau Twins. And ever since the Cocteau Twins came here, we would get all these other really cool bands in Columbus because they figured, hey, Columbus has got a scene, and let's go over there, you know? I mean, they seem to like what we're doing. So, I mean, after the Cocteau Twins here, I mean, I've seen people from, you know, Chris and Cozy, Einster's Endy, New Botan, The Fall. Section 25 was here, but I couldn't go to the show because it was 40 below zero outside, so I missed that one. I still got my ticket at home, believe it or not. But it was really neat. These guys kind of set the wheels in motion, I guess you could say, for bringing a lot of alternative bands, especially from England, to Columbus, Ohio. I tried to find anybody else that was doing anything strange or unusual. I did find this cassette. It was released in 1983. It was right after I moved here, and it was this big giant envelope, and I got it sitting on the table over there behind the screen. You'll be able to see it once I move the screen out of the way, but it came with a compilation cassette, all from Ohio, and it came in this really cheap-looking manila envelope with handwritten stamp art on it from October '83, and it's got a lot of interesting people in it, and including Gerald Nelson, who went on to form other bands. We'll get into him later. But this was the first thing that I found, so I knew there was some kind of a scene happening here in Columbus. Test Tube magazine, it came with this data file, and it had people in it that were making electronic music or were interested in computer graphics, and there was a lot of interesting people in here. One of them was James Towning, and we're going to get into him too real soon. Beat Kit 2, that was a hand-printed manila envelope basically, or a white envelope. And the Test Tube magazine on the left there, that came with a flexi disc. It had the Reptile House on it, which was pretty cool, and some reviews. It had Exmo Deutschland. They even came to Columbus, Ohio, too, because I taped the show, believe it or not. And Gerald Nelson, he's one of my heroes. Andy kind of introduced me, Andy Isold introduced me to Gerald. He was at OSU playing on one of these big, huge, giant modular Moog synthesizers, and it had no keys. I mean, it was just a big, huge modular system, and he had his headphones plugged into it, and that was the first time I met him. And then Andy would go on to record with Gerald Nelson as Phases of Chaos, and they actually opened up for Chris and Cozy at Stash's back in 1986. I taped that show too. Post-Industrial Noise, that was Gerald's band. They were really influenced by Chris and Cozy, and you can tell when you listen to this, especially Near Paris. You know, they kind of had that, you know, that sound, the techno sound with the, you know, kind of primitive type rhythms. But the Near Paris 12-inch now, it's worth a lot of money if you can find an original. I mean, it goes for over $100. But they recently reissued it, and that Post-Industrial Noise anthology is still available too on vinyl. So if you can find it, it's a very cool early piece of electronic music history in Columbus. This was my very first catalog. I released 4 tapes on the ITN label. They're listed up front. It was just me and my best friend called Pat Graphic. His real name was Pat Harvey. And we played at the lodge all the time in the trailer park we lived in. And these are the results, the first 4. And then after that, I started releasing solo stuff under the name of Musical Psychological. And so these are my earliest recordings. A lot of these I've deleted off the catalog because they're so primitive, but you know, you got to start somewhere. This was some early artwork that I put together. The one on the right, that was actually it's an original Pat Graphic photo. Pat was really into using the Commodore 64 and the VIC-20 for any kind of cool graphics that he could put together. And he was also really into photography. So he tried to combine photography with the very crude computer graphics that we had in 1984. So that we used that picture on the right for the first issue of Stimulus and Response. It was a cassette compilation that I put together, and it came with a magazine. We did that for the first 3 issues, and then we had 2 other Stimulus and Response cassettes after that, but no booklet. Too much work. You'll see the work that went into those booklets on the table behind the screen once you see it, because everything was done with glue, tape, typewriters, and anything else that we had that we could use to make something look different. But in 1984, yeah, we didn't have a whole lot. These are some early cassette catalogs that I put together from 1993 on the one on the right. The one on the left, that was from Stimulus Response 3. That, I think, was done in like 89. There's Stimulus Response 2 on the left that used a bunch of cut-ups, graphics. Catalog was in there. There was a sex offender series, and there was methods of recording the dead in there. The one on the right is one of my catalogs. It was the 4th one that I put out. It's a collage, and the originals behind the screen as well, so you can see how much went into this. I later changed the International Terrorist Network, or ITN, into Exoteque Music. And it was a smart move because during that time, the late 80s, early 90s, that's kind of when war broke out overseas. And then when I finally got a fan letter from some guy in jail saying, you know, hey, I love the ITN, I want to fight for the cause, I said, yeah, I got to change the name. So I changed it to Exoteque Music in the early 90s. This is a picture that Pat Graphic took by himself. He was really into photography. He lived in Columbus with me for about a year. We both went to DeVry Institute of Technology, and then Pat moved back to Michigan, and then he ended up going to Florida. And he is no longer with us anymore, so this is for Pat. And there's me and Pat at the Salvador Dali Museum. That was around probably 95 or so, yeah. And the catalog on the right is the catalog number 3. Pat used to make his own equipment, you know. We didn't have no money, like I said, so he said, well, I can buy all the parts, we'll make our own mixers. So that's his own homemade mixer right there on the left. He called it Homonic equipment. He even built like a brainwave machine with goggles, and you could adjust the flutter in the goggles to kind of make it look like you're looking at a dream machine, but you've got a pair of goggles on. And the picture on the right is another self-portrait of Pat. This is some more original artwork that Pat did. And that is a self-portrait of Pat. I've got that back here. And there is a cassette that he did with Chris Phinney over here of Harsh Reality Music that was put out on Chris's label. And there's my bud. Fact 22 was probably the first band that I recognized that was doing interesting music. I picked up this cassette at Magnolia Thunderpussy back in, I think it was, 84 or 85. And James did all kinds of stuff. I mean, he had his own studio. When we finally met, we really hit it off, and we became really good friends. This first tape, though, was done with Dave Butler, and I don't know if Dave's here. Are you here, Dave? No. Anyways, Dave's in a band as well. He still plays music a lot. He's a lead singer in a couple different bands. James Towning I've been trying to get a hold of for a while, and I haven't heard from him in probably about a year. The last I heard he was in Brooklyn, and then I think he moved one other place, and I'm not sure where he's at now. So hopefully James is doing good out there. James was the first one to do actual computer graphics for cassette tapes, and he was really, really good. This shows some of the cassette graphics that he did using the computer, and I still don't know how he did this because, I mean, my computer couldn't do anything like this. I think he had a Mac. That might have been a little difference, but I think also James's creativity was just unbounded, and these are some of his work. This is some more that Charm cassette's really cool. He ran a label called Black Music. He ran that for years, and the graphic on the right, that was a cassette also, and later it was released on CD. There's some more artwork that James did. It was neat because, I mean, most of the graphics on cassettes, you know, they were done very crudely, especially in the 80s and early 90s. So to see somebody of this caliber doing really neat graphics on cassettes, I mean, I was blown away. I really was. I was just like, dang, how can you do this? It looks so great. It looks professional. You know, he goes, oh, I just want it to look nice. And I said, yeah, I don't blame you. He does really, really great work. There's one of his catalogs. He also did the Ears to the Grindstone series. He did the second volume. It was called Back to the Grindstone. And I think I might have a picture of that. Right here, yeah. He did the graphics on this album, which included a lot of friends of mine that I used to trade tapes with, like David Prescott, Chris Phinney of Mental Anguish, Doug Walker, Alien Planetscapes. No Music was Carl Howard, who's in town, and is Carl here today? No. We tried to get Carl here. He lives in Columbus too, but he's also got health issues. Also, just to let everybody know that John Bennett will probably not be here tonight either because of his health issues, so let's think positive thoughts for them. James released my first cassette using multi-tracking. And he also remixed it for me and mastered it. And we called it Primitiva because in the early 80s, I was just starting to get into Exoteque music. And I just loved Exoteque music. And I still do, and it's a passion that has never left me. So I figured, well, I'll put my very first multi-track tape out, and I'll call it Primitiva because it's pretty damn primitive. But I like this release. It's a fun release, and I was very proud to have James put it out on his label. The cool cassette on the right is Body Release, and that consisted of a lot of really big electronic music artists here in Columbus, Ohio in the 90s. People like Todd Sines, which you'll see here. You got Todd Sines to Tonton Devante. Hiding in the back over there is Ed Luna. And then you got Charles Knoll. And yeah, when I met these guys, I knew they were gonna go somewhere. And they all had their own releases on their own labels. And yeah, this is a very big piece of Columbus history if you've ever seen Body Release. Did anybody here see Body Release? Yay, that's got to be Mark, right? Because we did do shows together a lot at the Acme Art Company. Elemental were the events that Ed Luna put together. That's Ed on the far right there with the 8mm reel in his mouth. I think he was trying to, maybe project something out of his nose. But yeah, Ed's living in Chicago right now, but he's still around. I just got a nice email from him. But he ran these Elemental events in the early 90s. up into the late 90s, and he always had electronic music artists play his events. You would have people like Mark Gunderson, Stevie Weimer as Spine. I would play. There would be people like Kevin Kennedy. He would play, and he went under different names as well, as like FBK and Powerhouse. And a lot of these old time folks, man, we released things under different names because they had a different sound to them. So each project was different. That's a picture of Ed Luna now. He's living in Chicago right now. I tried to get him here, but he couldn't make it. So hopefully next time if we do this again. He's really a educated and talented guy, and he did a lot for Columbus music in the 90s. Another thing in the 90s that came out was Sprague. I've got all 3 issues over there on the table, and these were compilations of all bands from Columbus, Ohio. And what was neat about it is they had the synth side, and then they had the guitar side. So you had the electronic music on one side of the tape, and you flipped it over, and then you got more of your alternative type rock roll, like Thomas Jefferson's Slave Apartments. Skrull was on that. Lots of other really cool bands. As far as the synth side, you had Martyr Colony, Evolution Control Committee, Fact 22, Jeff Central, which was my recording name, and that was a fun project. The artwork was also done by James Towning, who also put together the magazine, and they did 3 issues of that, and that was a lot of fun. James Towning also produced this CD of all electronic musicians from Central Ohio. This came out, I think, in the 90s, like maybe 95 or so. But it was called Music for Shopping, and it even has my friend Andy Isold on there under the name of Barbie Jeep. It's got James Towning of Fact 22 under the name of Cathode Raymond. So everybody had these different names that they went by for whatever project they were working on at the time. Even Chris Phinney and myself have a track on here, even though Chris was from Memphis. I composed this track here together and mixed it specifically for this release. So that was a fun one. And they sold this at World Record. Do you remember World Record? It was before Used Kids came along. They basically financed this CD. And then they had another CD. This is the follow-up, Adventures in Modern Recording. And I really like this one a lot. It had the first track on it. It's by the Weird Love Makers. And this was a trio of musicians that included myself and Mark Gunderson and another unsung genius named Greg Fernandez. And those were fun times. I think we recorded together for at least 8-9 years, man. So yeah, this was good times. And we got Mark Gunderson. He had his own tapes. I met him shortly after I met James Towning, because he was selling cassettes in the store too, and I saw these homemade things, and I'm like, what the heck is this stuff, I said, man, it sounds like lots of cut-ups and lots of weird stuff playing backwards, and uses lots of samples very acutely, and we ended up becoming really good friends, and we formed the Weird Love Makers together. And that's a picture of Mark there on the right as one of the Weird Love Makers, and that's one of his early cassettes on the left called Buddha Bleach. A couple more of Mark's tapes. Yezu, Boy of Man's Desiring. The date on that looks like 89. And then he did the Notes of Nihilistic Bliss. I'm not sure what year that came out, Mark.
Year before the other one.
Year before the other one, so that was 1988. Yep. And this one here was really what turned me on to Mark's music. I think this was sold at Magnolia Thunderpussy, And it was basically a leather-bound folder that included a picture of Mark in his, his doctor outfit, because he was Dr. Gunderson at the time, because he was experimenting with all kinds of research. And anyways, this is a really neat concept, because what he would do is he would take these CDs and he would kind of alter them or destroy them, I guess you could say. And he scratched them in such a way that they would still play, but they would usually skip in random places. So you really didn't know what kind of sample or what you were going to get when you played these compact discs that were altered. But it's the neatest concept, and it actually did work. So yeah, thanks, Mark, for those. I love that disc. Here's one of his cassettes that he actually released in an 8-track. He bought all these 8-tracks. Mark was good at packaging. I mean, we put CDs in floppy disks before, but this is a cassette inside an 8-track shell. This is Gunderphonics, which was just a classic tape of cut-up and collage work. And then we got a couple other ones here. I like the one on the left a lot, because this was a subliminal self-help tape. And what Mark did is he took all these different subliminal tapes that help you lose weight, help you stop smoking, and improve your ESP and more. I mean, you could do a lot of stuff. So the first side was to help you prevent and keep healthier. And the second side was reversed, so you could gain weight, lose your creativity, and so on. It was a great concept, and the packaging is really cool. I think I got it sitting over there on the desk so you can check it out. It's very neat. Mark was top of the heap when it came to creativity and packaging. And then he put the CD out on the right a few years later, called Plagiarism Nation, and that's got a lot of airplay on it. And I think he got a cease and desist order for sampling. What was his name?
Dan Rather.
Dan Rather, right? Rocked by Rape. That was the single. So, yeah, if you, I think I have some of these CDs. So if anybody wants one, let me know. Mark also formed Gaga back in the days. Gaga was with Gary Zowie, Ed Luna of the Elemental guys. You had Karen Crutchfield, and you also had Jason Olinsky. And they basically were kind of like like a poor man's Einstürzende Nubaten, because they really destroyed a lot of things during their onslaughts, their live presentations, and whatever you wanted to call it. Gary was a wild man, because he would set things on fire in the art gallery, so you had to kind of watch out for Gary. But it was a fun time. I seen him a few times. That's one of the posters that I won during one of the auctions. And the book on the right there was actually put together by Karen. She put that book together, and it's got a lot of really cool, rare photos and stuff. I think you can still probably order that online. It's one of those on-demand type books. There's Karen and Jason. And there's one of the Gaga releases. It came with a set of cards and a cassette tape, of course, inside a big giant card. So yeah, I mean, that's how creative Mark was with his packaging. Some of the side projects that came from that were Tone Elevator. This was Karen's band, and then there's a CD there on the left that was done by Adam McKinley. He played synthesizers with Karen in that band. Here's some Weird Lovemaker rarities. The picture on the right was taken, I think, at the Freakin' Pizza on Chittenden, right down on campus when OSU had a campus. I don't know if anybody, you know, I'm getting kind of old now. I'm going to be 60 this year. But campus back in the 80s and the 90s was not like the campus it is today. It's kind of sad. But we had a lot of fun, and this is one of our shows at the Freakin' Pizza. That's also one of our cassettes. I think it was our first one. It was called Sophisticated Savage. There's Greg Fernandez on the left there. He had his own solo things as well. Extremely hard to find, but if you can find anything, he recorded it under the name of Good Q Sign. And there's Mark, right, or not Mark, there's Greg with the actual porn star, Samantha Fox. That's her. He had his own radio show on WOSU called Ring Bells and Blow Whistles back in the 80s. I think this tape came out in 86. And I don't know if everybody remembers that radio show, but it was the most amazing radio show you would ever hear, because you'd hear alternative music from different bands all over, you know, Ohio, intermixed with Max Fleischer cartoons and the Master of Horror and weird horror films. He would mix them all together in his radio show, so it was fun just to listen to, because you never knew what was going to happen next. This is a couple things that I released on my ITN label. One was called Bula Bula for Betty Coed. That's on the left there. I put that out for Greg, and then before the Weird Lovemakers, actually, me, Greg, and Andy Isold of 10-Speed Guillotine, we recorded under the name of the Sex Musicians. And Andy made that really, really cool artwork on that cassette cover there on the right. And I don't know how he did it, but Andy worked with these giant pieces of, I don't know, it's like clear vinyl, and he would print on the clear vinyl, and he would actually take a picture of it, and when the film developed, it was the size of a perfect cassette cover every time. I still don't know how he did it, but the covers came out great, and this one here is one of my favorites. New Strange Thrills. Here's something that's interesting. Here's our names of the Sex Musicians. We had Greg Fernandez as Earl D'Amico. I was known as Jack Mehoff, and Andy Isold was known as Whip Antenna. Speaking of Andy Isold, here he is right here. He's here with us today. Let's give a round for Andy. I met Andy when we were working together at Camelot Music, believe it or not. And Andy, and I were talking, and we're putting cassettes out on the floor, and he asked, "What'd you do last night?" And I said, "Well, I went and saw Chris and Cozy." He said, "No way." He says, "We opened for him." I said, "Get the hell out of here. What do you mean you opened for him?" He goes, "Yeah, that was Gerald Nelson's band called Phases of Chaos." I said, "I recorded that show." He said, "Get the hell out of here." And I did. I recorded both Phases of Chaos with Andy Isold and Gerald Nelson, and then I taped the Chris and Cozy show too. Both were at Stashes. So that's how I got to meet Andy. That was about in 1989. And that's another one of Andy's homemade covers there, so that's very cool. Andy's also responsible for recording and producing the first Scrawl album, plus also too, it's there on the left. That's his first album credit, which is very cool. It's a great album, man. It's kind of a hard one to find now. I think it was put out on Rough Trade. And then the Chris and Cozy, that was the ad for Stashes back in 1986. Yep, $8 to go see Chris and Cozy, so that was a good day. 10-Speed Guillotine was our band. Me and Andy, we recorded together for over 30 years. We still do stuff occasionally, but we're slowing down. We're getting old. But our first release in the studio was called Laptop Appetizers. Andy had a studio called The Pleasure Lab, and it was always a pleasure to be down there because we recorded a lot, many weeks for many years down there. And I've got a lot of stuff that's been released, but I've got a lot of other stuff that hasn't been released. But we recorded things under multiple names, but most people know the 10-Speed Guillotine name, and it was a lot of fun. We opened up for bands like Martyr Colony and Nosferatu and a bunch of other bands. Body Released, we all played together. Be good. There we are. Here's a couple posters. I don't know if anybody remembers the 700 High Club, but it was at 700 North High. And back then, this was the early 90s where smart drinks were in, and they always had industrial raves, and they had DJs, and you could go in and get your smart drink and listen to 10-Speed Guillotine. So that was a lot of fun. These are a couple posters. I got these on the table behind the screen as well. And then Dan Rockwell was another really big friend. I met him in '88, believe it or not, right before Andy. I met Dan Rockwell because I was working, before I worked at Camelot, I worked for Buzzard's Nest. I don't know if anybody remembers Buzzard's Nest Records. I worked there from about 84 till about 88. And it was in '88 that I started selling that Primitiva tape. That's when it came out. And Dan Rockwell bought one at Buzzard's Nest, and he came back in the next day and said, "What the hell is that stuff?" He goes, "It's great, I love it." And we've been friends ever since, and now we record together under various names. Dan Rockwell records under the name Synthetic Handshake. This is me and Dan right there. That was a cassette called Painted Spirit that I released on the Exoteque music label. Yeah, Dan's still a really good friend. Dan, are you here? No, Dan's not here. I was hoping he would be here too, but he's still here as well. Dan also records with Andy and myself under the name of Circuitry Room. This is the second cassette that me and Andy recorded by 10-Speed Guillotine. We only did 2 studio releases. We got a lot of other oddball stuff, but this was the second and last studio release that we did. These were all made by James Towning again. Holiday for Strychnine, we released it here in Columbus. On the right is the one cover that Andy made. The one on the left is the version we made for Harsh Reality. This was Chris Phinney's label. Chris has over 300 cassettes on his label, and all original music by him and other bands that he knows. And it's a major piece of cassette culture, that whole catalog. What's really neat is that the first sides of these tapes are the same. Holiday for Strychnine Volume 1, but the second sides are different, so if you're a completist, you need them both. Resonance was a side project by me and Andy. This is a project where we basically recorded more ambient stuff. We kind of got rid of the rhythms. The 10-Speed Guillotine stuff is more what they called, the papers called as cyberpunk, because we were very industrial sounding, we had lots of rhythms. But for the Resonance series, we basically broke everything down to just ambient works. And these were really fun to do. We had these nights called analog nights where we would just hook up stuff in the Pleasure Lab, and we would just see what happens. And these were all just live recordings of very dark ambient music. So I put these out on my label as well. This was the last live performance that me and Andy did as 10-Speed Guillotine. We played with our good friends, MARTYR Colony. And then another really cool band at the time, Nosferatu. I don't know if anybody remembers them, but they were just hilarious to see play live because they had songs like Name Potato and stuff. And it's hard to describe. You'd have to see it to believe it. What was neat about this evening of Electro Terror is that the MC for the evening was Goblin Hood. And if you know Goblin Hood, his real name was James Biotti. He was a really, really influential artist for me. Very surrealistic type stuff like Charles Wentz, but he was the MC for this show, so it was really glad. If you get this tape, you'll actually hear Goblin Hood do a poem called "Hanging Tough in Walla Walla." Martyr Colony was a really big influence on the Columbus scene at the time. We did lots of gigs together. This was their first cassette called Abrasive Technology. It was put out in '95. It was produced by the guys that ran the Magnolia Thunder Pussy, which I think was Chuck at the time. And Martyr Colony got some good press. That article there on the right was in Arc magazine. They did articles on both Martyr Colony and Fact 22, which was very cool. But these guys were based in Columbus, Ohio, had a very hard industrial edge, and kind of had that skinny puppy type vibe, you know. Artie really had some awesome vocals, and he let loose. Here's some pictures of the second tape that they did called Singe. There's some neat pictures of Artie up there, and I'm not sure if that's, no, that can't be Jeff. I'm not sure who's playing guitar right there. I'm not sure. Here's another picture. Now that's a picture of Jeff on the left there with the glasses, Jeff Muth. And then Artie's on top and on bottom. I'm not sure who that middle person is. Artie had a stroke not too long ago, folks, and he's doing well right now, and I just wanted to let everybody know that Artie's still doing good right now. He's going through some physical therapy, but he is happy to be alive, and he's getting back into his artwork. So Artie's still here. This was the Arc magazine I was talking about. The first issue had an article on Fact 22. Second issue had the second part of the Fact 22 article and Martyr Colony. And what's really neat is this is how roads can cross sometimes, is the publisher of this magazine, his name is Ken Holinsky. He only did 3 issues of this magazine. I got them all, but he still publishes magazines, and believe it or not, the magazine he publishes right now is called Exoteque Modern. John Bennett, he was going to be here with us tonight, but he couldn't. He's not feeling well, so hopefully he will feel better soon. John put out all kinds of really neat cassettes back in the 80s and early 90s, and this is a few of his cassettes. And it's a really neat mixture. He combined poetry with low-grade electronic music, and it worked. And if you can find any of his stuff, it's extremely rare, but if you can find it, get it. He also runs Luna Besant right now, and he's a writer. I mean, he's a poet, and he's an artist, and he keeps creating things, which is great. I mean, he's a man after my own heart, because I know the feeling of not being able to stop creating. And so he has multiple books on his own label, and the cassette on the right is one of his early cassettes. It was done, I think the Blur was done in 1987. He's got a new album out too right now, and if you can find it, I think they had one left over at Used Kids. Me and Hal McGee saw it, so there's one left. It's already sold out. I think they only made 300 copies, so if you find his album, it's called A Flattened Face Fogs Through. And it's a great compilation of a lot of those old cassettes that were released here in Columbus, Ohio, all privately made, handmade. That picture on the right is real special to me because that was done during the John's 70th birthday bash. John is now 81. Spine is another really, really good friend of mine that I found here in Columbus that was doing very interesting electronic music. Stevie Weimer is his name. And is Stevie here? Nope. Okay, well anyways, Steve's still doing stuff, and yeah, I mean, that spine there, I think I took that picture of, it was at some kind of spinal surgery place or something, but I saw that and I was like, my God, that's so cool, I gotta take a picture of it. Eventually we'll use that for a reissue because he's got 2 releases under the name of Spine, and I've already digitized them, and I'm hoping to make it available soon. It's very, very interesting stuff. There's what the first Spine release looks like. All the artwork and collage work was done by Stevie. He also liked to release some CDs, and he would also paint them. These are hand-painted CDs, and they would come in really, really unique packaging because he was really into art as well. You know, most musicians are artists in their own way, and they just keep creating things, and you know, I totally understand. This Tactile Vision release was a CD that came in a piece of broken, dead technology. And he spray painted these things and burned the CDs and put them in cases, put stickers on it, and he sold it just like that. He had about 10 of these at one time. And I loved them all. I wanted to buy them all, but I just bought one. And I think it's over there on one of the tables so you guys can see it too. It's pretty cool. Me and Stevie recorded under the name of Projectile. Very dark industrial stuff. Some of it's kind of ambient. But yeah, this was a really neat project that we did. It was a one-off type thing, and we recorded it at Stevie's house back in the 90s. This is a couple circuitry room CDs that have yet to be made. I'm in a bad habit of making covers before I make the actual CD or cassette. And so these are the first 2 releases. I just got to finish making the recordings. This was a recording that we did for the Frequency Friday, the Fuse Factory show, and we had Mike Techspeak of the Elemental group and of Body Release. Mike's still around. He's still very creative. He's moved to Detroit right now, but he came down specifically for this show so he could jam with me and Andy. That was a fun show. David Reed, he released all kinds of neat cassettes back in the early 90s. We actually played together at the Mad Lab when it was originally over here close to downtown, and it later became a tiki bar called the Grass Skirt, but that's where I first heard of David, and he was releasing stuff under the name of Lupine, and it was very, very, very noise-oriented works, very harsh distortion, not too rhythmic, but lots of noise. And these were, I think, his first 3 releases, and I still have them. I got them on display too, so you guys can check them out. But he put these things in the handmade art inside of these baggies, and then they put the cassette inside of it. So David was putting out cassettes from the 90s on. He also goes under the name of Envenomist, so if you ever see any of those, they're highly recommended. David's here today, and he's going to be playing with us as well, so that's going to be fun. I can't wait. Mike Shiflett was another artist from Columbus, Ohio, that I met in the 90s. Mike's got just a plethora of albums and cassettes and CDs and all the above. His recording output's insane. I mean, to try to collect everything he's done, it'll take you quite a while. In fact, there's one set of releases that equals up to 24 hours. I put it all on a flash drive one time, and yeah, it's literally 24 hours of sound that you can pop into your car and just leave it in there for a couple weeks, and you'll never hear the same sound twice. Here's a couple other Mike Shiflett releases. The Choir in the Army is one of my favorite. That's on vinyl. It's on the right there. He also recorded with Joe Pansner. He did a few electronic cassettes as well as the that CD on the left there. Joe's a real nice guy. He actually mastered one of the collaboration tapes that I did. Ryan Jewell is another artist from Columbus, Ohio. Ryan's extremely talented, and his work has taken him all over the United States. He's a percussionist for various different bands, and he does a great job. This is his early stuff where he was really into electronic music. I think he did a few performances for the Fuse Factory as well. And the album on the right is highly recommended if you can find it. Lisa Belladonna, she's a newcomer to the electronic scene. She's been really just going gung-ho with her electronic stuff. I mean, I've never seen so much electronic gear in my life as what she owns. But she has a few releases out as well on cassette and on vinyl, but they're very hard to find. But she's still keeping the electronic scene alive in Columbus, Ohio. So I've got to thank her for that. Central Inhabitants is my solo project, and I'm still doing that as well. That keeps me sane, I guess. This is the Fuse Factory CD, and we do have some of these for sale. I think they run $10. And this was the second compilation CD that I put together for the Fuse Factory. And it basically it's a compilation of all the bands that play for all the Frequency Friday events. And it came out really well, and all the cover art was done by Stevie Weimer as well. Jerry Kranitz, who's with us here today, wrote the Cassette Culture book. He's actually from Columbus. He lives in Hilliard, and he wrote this book, and it was published in Germany. So to find this book, you might have to spend a lot of money on shipping charges, because this book weighs probably about 5 pounds, and it's just chock full of different labels that did different things back in the early 80s and 90s. It's just basically all this homemade music and DIY stuff. These were people that were doing everything from their homes for many, many years, and before the internet. The only way we traded tapes back in the day were when you had to go to the post office. And so we would trade tapes with people from all over the world. And the only way we contacted each other would be through magazines. There was a magazine called Sound Choice, and there was a few other magazines as well, Op Magazine, Fact Sheet 5. That was an area where people could get their tapes reviewed, and then they would post their address in there, and you could, if you saw something in there that looked interesting, you could write them, and then you could trade tapes. So if you sent out let's say 10 tapes to 10 different people, they usually sent you 10 tapes back. So you always had a fresh library of sounds coming into your mailbox all the time, and it was great. You know, you just had to wait for it. There was no instant access like today. And I want to thank everybody. This is the picture of me, Al Margolis of Sound of Pig, Carl Howard, who ran the audiophile label, and Jerry Kranitz, who wrote the Cassette Culture book. So thank you very much.